So Fiona, you've often said to me that when you're painting, you're trying to express an emotion or an idea. Can you talk a wee bit about how, what inspires you and how you get to that point?
Yes, of course. Well, I usually have two streams going on at the same time, if you like, two sort of areas. One is the actual physical phenomenon, which I am out in the Uist landscape, walking. I do a lot of walking, and there is a moment, it's not all the time, when I'm suddenly very aware of a specific physical situation or event. Can be quite simple. It could be just a shaft of light on a moorland, but in the work I've been doing recently, it was actually an early morning walk on a very, very low tide beach, and this beach seemed to just disappear. It was just a huge space of sort of silverness and almost empty, and I was very shocked in a way. And then a flock of geese, I think they were geese, not swans, flew over. Well, not a flock, it was just a line of geese flew over. And these birds seemed to make the space visible in a way that I hadn't been able to see before.
Yeah.
So it was quite a vivid experience. So that was the actual physical moment. And then that was very much linked to a sort of literary interest of mine. I had recently become very interested in the poetry of Rilke, the German poet, and words of his came back to me then about bird flight, and about the spaces in the and about how they work in spaces. So with one it was, with my senses, as with birds I climb into the windy heaven in the ponds broken off by the sky. Oh. So there's that feeling that the sky and the earth are sort of merging, but at the same time the birds have their own space in which they are moving through these.
Right.
And
almost dissecting it, or?
Well, making it visible in a way.
Right.
It's for someone wanting to portray it for me, how would I do that if there wasn't something I could put my finger on? Yeah. So, returning from that, I came back and made a number of small sketches based on that experience. They were very simple sketches, of which I will put some examples, really just trying to show this big space, and the birds became just a line through it, or sometimes two lines through it. Mm-hmm. So I would say to people, I'm painting birds, and I think they thought they were going to be birds, as mm-hmm. in pictures of birds, but the birds are just a line through the space. And at the same time, I had been looking at and reading about a Japanese notion of ma, which is again about the space, the gap that's left between things, being as important as the objects. And mm-hmm. And then I saw this quotation I loved, which is an emptiness full of possibilities, like a promise yet to be fulfilled. So there was these two notions and the physical experience. So I made a number of smaller drawings, and then quite a long time afterwards I revisited them and painted two very large canvases based on that feeling or that experience. Both of the canvases were 4 foot by 3 foot, so there was quite an effort to retain the same feeling of, as it were, ponds broken off from the sky that Rilke spoke about. Yeah. So that's really the inspiration often comes from a physical moment, and something sometimes just a line of poetry or a song or a piece of text, even something that's in my mind which seems to capture what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
And what about you, Man? What do you find inspires you now in this environment we live in?
Yeah, well, it is very much the environment that my work's based on at the moment. And again, it's a lot of it's the beach, the moorland as well. But I'm working on the beach at the moment, and I'm really interested in, it's related to your Ma idea in a way, but it's what's been and gone, really. You know, on the beach, the tide comes in and out twice a day, it washes, it makes images on the sand, and then it wipes them off and leaves another one. It brings things in the sea and deposits them on the shore. I like the huge space around me on the beach, but also the huge space that appears in tiny little patches of the sand, if you like, you know. And I like that when they're washed away, there's a trace left. It makes me think about ideas like loss and grief even, and of migration. People and objects turn up on a foreign shore, you know, out of place on one hand, and yet they become altered by the place, their journey here, and they also alter the environment they land in. And I find that quite exciting and fascinating. I've found things on the shore, like plastic bottles that have gooseneck barnacles growing on them. I've found creel tags from America, and I've been able to track down the boat that they came from. I also like taking casts of the objects where they settle in the sand, and you remove them and cast the space that they inhabited. And I've made a few kind of collages with things like that. So yeah, I just find the beach endlessly inspiring.
Marnie, we talked about the different approaches we have to the process of making work, and I was wondering if you would like to say a bit more about that, about how you go about actually working.
Right, okay. Well, for quite a long time I've been interested in the little changing abstract images on the beach, and they're just fascinating. And so I walk, I see things, I do little sketches, I take a lot of photographs, and then sometimes I'll do little experimental drawings and things, but it's not really an exact plan of what I'm going to do in the painting. It's an idea. Sometimes maybe a rough composition or something. But then it can be completely different on the canvas. It develops on the canvas as a kind of a dialogue, you know, between the marks that I make and the colours that I use. And, you know, all the time I have the idea of what I'm trying to express, but it really happens on the canvas, mainly. But the other aspects of my work, I mean, I've been experimenting with the sculptural qualities of paint, and I've been doing a lot of things like cutting it, compressing it, casting it, and collaging it into paint, you know, into paintings. So, and that is very much a kind of reacting to the pieces that I have and the way they relate to each other. And another very different aspect is of expressing the landscape. It is in the colour, because you often see, just by accident, amazing colour combinations at different times of year, different light. And so with that, I've been doing quite a lot of reducing the reference to landscape to just a horizontal line, and then trying to record colour. Really, it's hard to explain, but I just kind of almost like doodling in a way.
Right, that's interesting. So well, all of these very much relate to what you spoke before about the love of paint and the kind of the qualities of the paint itself. It sort of obviously links through to your subject matter and your processes.
Yeah, because I think it's a language in itself, and when you're using it, it doesn't often or doesn't always say what you think it's going to say, So you have to kind of think on your feet. Well, that's the way I work anyway.
Right, that's very interesting.
What about yours then? You have a very different process.
Well, it's relatively simple, really. I'm quite straightforward in the sense that I see something and then I work from a drawing or a sketch. It can be watercolour or maybe pastel, depending on what my subject is. Usually relatively small scale, because I'm often balanced on a rock somewhere. So I don't normally take out big boards, or although I think I should perhaps, but I don't. And then from those, as long as they have enough information for me to work from, and as long as they kind of encapsulate what I really want to show, then I just take them straight forwards into a larger canvas. Sometimes that's 3 foot by 3 foot or 4 foot by 3 foot, which is in itself quite a challenge, because clearly I'm increasing the scale. That doesn't always work, and I have to make adjustments. But the essence of what I was doing and the structure and generally the composition is the same, and that I need. Otherwise, I wouldn't know how to make choices. But I certainly have to alter it. I mean, they're not an exact copy, but there is a strong relationship between the initial studies and the work. So that's quite important. The move from a watercolour to a painting, or from a pastel to a painting, in itself I enjoy, because it's the whole challenge of making those marks from one media work in another media, which isn't always straightforward, because the qualities of the actual media, as you said, really dictate to some extent what you're doing. But it's more a kind of interest, a fascination. How do I retain these qualities that were in a watercolour or in a pastel studies in a bigger piece of work? So
that's so difficult.
And then, so yes, the selection of the image, as you have spoken about, is just a momentary thing, or it can be linked to, as I've talked before, about text. But the image has to have something in it which is quite exciting or different or moving in some ways. I can't switch that on. I can't think, right, I'll do some landscape work now, because I haven't got the interest really. So, and it often has to be an image or a subject which in itself is quite challenging. For an example, we live in a wonderful landscape, but we also have wonderful birds, which I've been quite fascinated in my work, although I'm not a bird person. But swans are a feature of our life in Uist, and it was coming back one evening down the road where I live, with fantastic colours in the moors. Like you, the colours can be quite dramatic, and there were deep purpley reds and browns that the moors had gone at the end of autumn, and then flying over that was a single swan, this flash of light, that white,
Yes.
moving across the landscape. And I was just, terribly excited, and came back, and not from it, but from the memory of it.
Yes.
I did a small study, which I since then translated into painting, and that has proved fairly problematic due to the nature of the colours and the subject. And
I suppose the fact that it was an instantaneous event,
yes,
that recreating that must be tricky.
yes, and trying to get both the idea of this bird or this thing moving over the landscape and the whiteness of it against these deep colours was quite challenging. And in fact, as in many of my bird paintings, people are a bit bemused by the fact that it is a bird at all. I asked my neighbours who are looking after my work if I could have my swan flying painting, and they actually didn't really know which one I meant until I explained to them. To me it seems ultimately very obvious, but that's because I have the memory of it. So these are the kinds of starting points and work. I've made a few notes here. I don't think there's... again, I've worked from watercolours into the big beach paintings, and with that it was the experience, because I was at that point living over on the west side where the beaches are much more, you're surrounded by them, and I walked every day, but I didn't want to do a painting of a beach. I wanted to do a painting of that sudden flash of experience you get as you wheel round and see this white beach disappearing away from you. So it was quite hard to get away from just being quite topographical, or just, and to actually try and find what the experience was that I was seeking to show. And I've done one big painting hoping that I had created that feeling of the beach rushing away from you, because it's not static really. You're moving in it, and it's moving away with you or away from you.
Yes.
So the subject and then the techniques are there, but they're dictated basically by the subject. So although I'm making adjustments, I'm not working out the painting on the canvas. I have a very clear vision of what I want the painting to look like.
Yes.
And I have to move towards it. Otherwise, because I'm terribly seduced by what I do on the canvas, that's a beautiful thing, I wouldn't make choices. I would just be forever changing and looking again, because I would paint many paintings over the one.
Yes.
So I try to restrain myself. So quite a simple processes really. So Marnie, I'm sure you look at artists' work. I wonder whether you'd like to talk a bit about that.
Artists that I like are, I have always liked for a long time Frank Auerbach. I like the way he paints very thickly, and his paintings have got almost sculptural qualities, and I love that. And also I love his process, because he doesn't, if he doesn't like what he's done, he just scrapes it off and he starts again. And he's painted some of his subjects, mainly portraiture. He's painted some people for years, and they come every week and he paints them. If it's not right, scrapes it off, starts afresh the next time, so that when he finally likes what he's done, it's been painted in one go and it's fresh, but it's got all this history and all the knowledge and experience of his subject that he's built up over all these attempts. So I like that, and it kind of resonates for me with the way the tide washes off the shore and leaves a new image, but the history of the marks that have been before are still there. Frank, and then another person I've been looking at is Gerhard Richter. Maybe not all of his painting, but I saw his cage paintings at the Tate, and they're all in a room. They're huge canvases. They're all around you as you walk into this room, and the paint he paints it's very thick and pastel, and he scrapes off and lays it back on again with a squeegee, and you're very conscious, or at least I was anyway, of the paint around you as a substance, almost an entity in itself. They're very abstract. It's not representational. The paint is just standing for itself, really, and I love that about them. And I was so blown away with them. I did a couple of attempts myself a few years ago. I was lucky enough to be on a residency at Tykershebag, the Secret Sea, and we visited these abandoned bulk feeders in the Sound of Harris, and they had just amazing surfaces that had accrued with rust and algae and seaweed, and just general disintegration of the structures. They had these just beautiful surfaces, so I used that kind of technique with the squeegee to try and recreate that. I love Gerhard Richter. There's other people, Carol Gibbons, and she's a very she is highly rated, but she was unknown to me until a few years ago, and yet she was a contemporary of Peter Howson and Alistair Gray, these folk, and yet she is a fabulous female artist that I had not heard of till relatively recently. She's just beautiful, free painting with fantastic colours. She puts quite unusual colours together, so I love her. Yeah. And another person that I love is Richard Wright, a very different painter from those I've mentioned, but he paints mainly on walls of galleries and public spaces, and they're generally have a limited lifespan because of that. They're on the wall, so they get painted over or scrubbed off, and so again I like that for the impermanence. He likes it. He likes not having his past paintings as a burden. He can move on to whatever's new, and also they can't be given a monetary value because they're impermanent. So I like that approach. But again, there's this wiping away, but the archaeology is left behind. So I like that. So yeah, and loads of others, but too many to mention. What about you? Who are your main raves?
Well, it's all through the time that you're a painter, and I suppose it started at art college. You sort of vaguely fall in love with the painter and become quite obsessed with them, and take what you want from that. And I think the first person I recall feeling like that would be Mondrian. Not so much his paintings at the time, but his drawings, particularly of trees, where he's looking at the spaces, really, the structure of the tree. They're extraordinary, which eventually led him to go on to very abstract and reduced paintings of squares and lines and very basic primary colours. But I think he also had kind of philosophic ideas relating to them. And it was one of those times that I actually went and saw some Mondrian. I'd been obviously looking at books and reproductions and and then when I saw the painting, I was bitterly disappointed, which is usually the other way around. But I had expected something crisp and kind of bold, and it was kind of fuzzy and well, I felt badly painted, but of course it wasn't really. So normally it's the other way around. You've seen a reproduction, but it gives you nothing of the impact of, say, a Van Gogh. But when you see the real thing, it just is so extraordinary.
Yes.
And the light is just shining out of it. So that was Mondrian. And then I suppose there's a big tradition of sort of painterliness within the Scottish arts, and I was definitely influenced by that. So, but looking at more European art, I suppose, or even Russian art in Kandinsky, who obviously led the way to abstraction, and also with his paint qualities and his colour, and then Kokoschka and a number of other artists whose features was really the use of paint and the structure that they gave that. And then looking more in the Scottish context, we're looking at sort of Joan Erdley with her Catalan paintings, and also the Scottish colourists generally with their approach to paint and colour. And then much more recently, I think I've just, partly to do with these conversations maybe, I was looking at the work of Nicholas de Stijl, someone I had known about as a student but hadn't looked at for years, and suddenly amazed at his actual use of paint and the wonderful way he uses edges within his painting, so that as one colour or one block of paint meets another, very abstract landscapes, you get these edges building up between them, leaving the slight traces of the paint before and then the next layer, and it creates a wonderfully dynamic expression within the painting of very simple block-like shapes. So yes, I think you see exhibitions which influence you. You see work that influences you, and you sort of take what you need from it, and then sort of move on. And in a way, it's always a discovery to see new artists' work. And although we live out here in the Hebrides, we have artists coming. Barbara Ray came to do workshops, and no one could be more stunning.
I remember that was fabulous. Marion Lee. And
we've had some wonderful artists come here and share their work with us. So we're not bereft of examples, and we have a very active painting community here. We've
been taught by so
we can enjoy that. So yes, influences by other artists are important, and I think it's great to recognise them and to use them as well.
Yeah.
More recently, I've been certainly, because I saw an exhibition at the City Art Galleries, I was very, very impressed with Victoria Crowe, a fantastic painter, beautiful compositions, and obviously changed her manner of painting over the many years that she worked. So if you start with the shepherd's life and the amazing scenes that she painted from her cottage of her neighbour, and the interiors that she did then, right to when she visited Venice, and maybe it was after her son's tragic death that she went out, and as part of that sort of process she started working on absolutely fantastic compositions of a kind of combination of Venice and Scottish landscape merged, and they're quite extraordinary paintings. So that made a big impression on me. So I think you do find where you look is slightly, you begin to search for perhaps something which will inspire you or excite you, and it can be just an artist who's working close by or working in as we are in the islands, at someone that you admire, or you find in their work something that you can. I don't know. It's not that you're emulating it. It's more that it's just making you think a little bit more deeply about what you do yourself.
Yes, I think that's true.
So, I mean, at art college, we always had an exercise in transcription, which was actually making a sort of your own copy of a painting. And I did a Uccello, actually, of the Battle of San Paolo, I think it was. And I loved doing that, and it gave me a lot of inspiration, really, because of that close examination of another person's work. So there's always the idea that, you know, you could be working in the style of, but not copying. It's a different notion.
Yes, yeah, I think that's true. That's where you make breakthroughs in your work, I think.
Yes.
When you push yourself in a different direction.
Yes, because like many things, you know, you can find yourself stuck almost in a kind of, it's hard to break away from either the way you paint or maybe the subject matter you choose, and sometimes you need to jolt yourself out of that. And but it's a complicated process, really, like many things.
Yeah.
So, Marnie, we've talked a lot about our work and how we go about it, and I wondered what you feel is the next steps for your practice, or what you look forward to in terms of as it were, putting it out there and achieving some sort of public face for your work.
Right. Well, I have been involved in a few group exhibitions. And in 2016, I was part of a group that had an exchange with an artist collective in Germany. And since then, you know, we've had a lot of contact with them. Some of them become really good friends. And I have been out, and so have one or two other people been back out and visited again. And some of their artists have been back to Uist. So I would really like that kind of connection to continue and develop, because I feel it's been very fruitful. I've been involved in a group exhibition with one of their artists and some people from here, and you included. And I think that exhibiting really it motivates you. It makes you produce a cohesive body of work towards doing that anyway. And it requires a bit of bravery and self-belief to actually put your work on the wall. That's kind of confidence building. So I do want to continue with that. I like working with a group as well. And yeah, that's basically. And also I want to continue with the themes that you know, that we've been talking about, explore them a bit further. What about you? What are your plans?
Well, very similar, I think, to yourself. Exhibiting, as you've pointed out, has its ups and its downs, but it's a challenge, but it's also a way of confirming or an affirmation of what you're doing and a belief in it, you hope. And it makes you perhaps be a bit more professional than you might be, and actually thinking about how you want your work to be perceived by people, and so that's quite useful. It's forced me, because of the kind of digital marketing that we hope to work with in our exhibition. We're planning at the moment a group exhibition in London. We're thinking of digital marketing and all that implies, and so we're hoping to have a profile in terms of a website. Possibly, I mean, some people may go towards Instagram, but it's making you think about how your work can be put out into the wider community. Not necessarily in London, but we've had group exhibitions here in Uist, and that in itself is very exciting. And again, to work towards a theme without being too self-conscious about it, but it helps in discussion with other artists about where they're going with this work and how in many ways, it helps the cohesiveness of an exhibition, but it helps the cohesiveness of your own work.
Yeah,
And,
I think that's true.
And in discussion, that's been helpful, as has this discussing artists in conversation.
I know
that we've done.
It's made me want to go home and paint.
It's kind of brought things up that you had perhaps discounted or forgotten in your busy life, and you think, oh yes, okay.
Get back
so
to that.
it's been quite exciting and quite useful.
Yeah.